Welcome, everybody, to another Prismatic Labs workshop. Today, we're talking about product automations and integrations and solving kind of the long tail of integration requests that you receive. Uh, if I've not met you yet, my name is Taylor Reese. I'm a developer experience engineer at Prismatic. Let's kick things off here with a poll. I'm curious if a customer comes to you and says, "Hey, we need a new integration or automation." What do you do right now? Do you point them to your API and just say, "Hey, good luck"? Do you point them to like Zapier, Make, or some other third-party tool that lets you build some integrations? Do you build the integration yourself and just do a custom one-off, or maybe you just don't even have a good answer to those options? Yeah, can everybody hear me okay? Michael Stallings, you're good. One note here, or a couple notes here as you fill out the poll. We will be recording this session, so if you have if you need to drop off early, or if you want to share this session with a coworker later on, we'll send out the recording here probably in the next day or two. There's also going to be a dedicated Q&A section at the very end. So if you have any questions as we go, bottom of Zoom, there should be a Q&A box where you can type a question. We'll be dropping some links to some documentation and that sort of thing throughout the session. Anywho, let's get going to the thing that we're here to talk about today, integrations and product automations. So the problem kind of stated is that you can build 100 integrations to Salesforce and HubSpot, NetSuite and Slack and all the million other, apps that your customers use. And there's always going to be some niche system. There's 10,000 SaaS apps out in the world. There's going to be some system that your customers want to integrate with that you don't have a, built-in out of the box integration for. So you've got some answers that you could give your customers. You could say, "Hey, we've got an API, just use it." But that requires that all of your customers have some development resources available to them to go like build out the scripts necessary to import or export data from your app. You could say, "Hey, use Zapier or some other, low code tool." But that sends your customers outside of your product into somebody else's. And it really kind of dilutes the experience that you want to have built. You want to keep your customers in your app whenever possible. So how do you solve this kind of long tail problem without your own roadmap suffering and spending 90% of your dev hours building every single little custom integration that's available? So that's where our like embedded workflow builder came in. We started by building our embedded workflow builder where customers can build their own workflows. We added an AI Copilot so they can use plain English to describe this type of integration or workflow they want to build, and it'll add those triggers and steps and components that you need. You can configure it to fire on in product events. When something happens in your app, you can set up those triggers to automatically fire. And your team ends up retaining like full control of those automations. You can define the menu of like triggers and actions that are available to your customers. You can monitor what workflows have been built, how many customers have generated workflows. And by having that workflow builder in your app, it really becomes this kind of self-service place in your app where your customers can go ahead and build automations in your app without your roadmap suffering. So I want to do a couple of demos here to show off. I know many of you are probably familiar with our workflow builder. I'm going to reference it as EWB, Embedded Workflow Builder, a few times. But I want to show off EWB, tack on AI Copilot, show what that looks like. And then I want to show something that we came out with pretty recently that are called workflow contexts, which allow you to have a little more kind of fine-grained control over what your customers see when certain things happen within your app. And so without further ado here, let's just minimize this. I'm going to keep some notes open for myself just to remind myself to show certain things. But taking off my Prismatic developer hat for a moment here, imagine that I'm logged into your app Acme OS. And within Acme OS, I can do a number of things. I can manage invoices and leads and tickets and to-do items. And there's some workflows and whatnot. And as a user of Acme OS, I can go and check out all of your pre-built integrations. I've even deployed a couple of these pre-built integrations, but not every single thing that I might want to integrate it with is available as a pre-canned integration that you've provided. And so I might want to go ahead and build some workflow for myself here. So as a user of Acme OS, this is EWB, by the way, the embedded workflow builder. I might go ahead and create a new workflow for myself. I'll say something like, send new tickets to MS Teams, something like that. And as a user in the embedded workflow builder, I get dropped into the same sort of integration designer that you're all familiar with if you're Prismatic users. It's pretty similar, few kind of caveats there. But as an embedded workflow user, I can do things like, well, trigger, I might need to change my trigger here. I might need to say, well, I want to trigger this off of something else, not just a generic webhook. Oh, it looks like Acme does supply a built-in workflow or built-in trigger. So maybe I want to do something when records are changed in Acme. Okay, that looks about right. Record type when a ticket is changed. Uh, when a record ticket is created, then maybe I want to go do something with one of these apps. I want Microsoft Teams, but I end up like scrolling through about 200 connectors or so. I can search for those connectors, but I can look for Microsoft Teams here. I can add a messages step, map some fields, create some connections, etc. And this all works out pretty well for any user that is familiar with a low-code designer. Um, if they've used, Zapier or Salesforce's low-code builder, etc. It's a pretty intuitive interface. But one of the problems that your users are going to face is like when they first get into the workflow builder, we've got a problem that we're calling kind of our blank canvas problem. Um, they just see an empty workflow with a trigger. There's uh, not a lot of prompting for what they should do next because what they want to do might be a really kind of niche thing. So you've got a few options here for supplying more context or more prompting to your users as they get into the workflow. I'll go ahead and save my half-built workflow here for a moment. When your customers add a new workflow, you can supply them with templates for kind of common tasks that they might want to do. And you do that in Prismatic by popping open your workflow templates. You can add a new workflow template and publish it and whatnot. And those are pretty helpful if you want to supply your customers with some templates for common tasks. Like in this case here, we've got a trigger that's already pre-populated with that ticket created, those ticket created inputs. Your user can go ahead and click into the various steps that exist and say, hey, I want to create a connection over to Slack. That sure seems like a reasonable thing for me to do. And then once that connection is established, they can go ahead and select one of their channels. What was I going to put this in? I had a channel sitting somewhere. Labs webinar. And once they've built out this workflow to their specifications, they can go ahead and publish the workflow. Here, I'll go ahead and update to the latest. Save a new version, enable this version. And now as a user of Acme, I've got a workflow pretty quickly, within about a minute or so. I've got a workflow that says whenever a ticket's created and the ticket happens to be of critical nature of priority critical, then go send a notification over to Slack. And within those a couple of minutes or whatever, I've now got a workflow where I can create a new ticket, say something like, the system is down. The system is down. It's a critical thing. It's a bug. Go submit a ticket that the system is down, and then I can start getting some notifications over in Slack that, hey, the new critical ticket was created. The system is down. Let's go check out that ticket in Acme. Now, those templates are kind of nice. This all could have been a pre-canned integration here if you wanted it to be. The reason why these templates are kind of nice is uh, there might be more modifications that your customers want to do that are kind of out of the scope of just changing a few config variables. Like if my user wants to send notifications on critical tickets, but they're not a Slack shop, they're a Microsoft Teams shop. They can still reach for that template that I've built out for sending Slack notifications on critical tickets. And within a couple of clicks, they can say, oh, I don't want a Slack notification. I want a Teams notification here. And at least they have a kind of shell of a workflow that they can go off of and build out. And you can make these templates as complex as you want, but it does give your customer some semblance of an idea of what to do. Like how do I know if a ticket is critical, or like maybe they want to send notifications only if the priority is high, not critical. They can go and start making those modifications as they need. So that's kind of step one for the blank canvas problem. You can provide workflow templates to your customers to build out these workflows more quickly. The second thing that we developed after we got through building embedded workflow builder is we wanted to make it so that you could use plain English to describe the things that you want to have built. And we call that our AI Copilot. And if you want to enable AI Copilot on one of your customers, here's Hooli here. I had Workflow Builder enabled previously, but I might want to enable Workflow Builder with Copilot. I can go ahead and do that. And once I have that, let's go ahead and save. Sure. You know what? I'm going to delete that one. Once I have that available, when I click add a new workflow, and maybe my customer says quick start, they just want to have a blank workflow to start with, they're going to be prompted. Oh, looks like I need to refresh my page here. My apologies. Did I hit save? Yes, I hit save. There we go. Build with AI. Didn't get the feature flag. Now I've got this build with AI prompt here. And so I can give my AI Copilot a plain English set of instructions for how I want my workflow to look. So I might say something like, send important tickets to Richard. I'm going to build with AI. Let's go ahead and try building with AI. I might say something to the tune of, whenever a ticket is created in Acme, run this workflow. If the ticket is or has a priority of high or critical, and the ticket has no assignee, um, assign the ticket to Richard Hendricks. All right, so whenever the ticket is created in Acme, run this workflow. If the ticket has a priority of high or critical and the ticket has no assignee, assign the ticket over to Richard Hendricks. So I'm going to click this for a moment, and then I want to talk workflows and integrations versus automations. It was our thesis at the beginning building EWB that a lot of these workflows would be related to uh, connecting your app to the other apps your customers use. But what we found was it seemed like about a third of the customers that wanted EWB didn't just want it to integrate with third-party apps. They wanted it to build automations within their own ecosystem. And thinking about it, it makes all the sense in the world. There's a reason that thousands of people have the job title of Salesforce administrator. Salesforce administrators sometimes connect Salesforce to the other apps that, somebody uses internally, but often what Salesforce administrators do is say, when thing happens in Salesforce, make sure these other three things happen in Salesforce as well. They're making workflows that trigger when Salesforce stuff happens to go do other Salesforce stuff. And I know a lot of your products, a lot of your platforms are complex and sophisticated enough that you've got very similar problems that your customers want to solve. When something happens in your app, you want some other stuff to happen in your app. And so we're kind of referencing these as automations. I want whenever something happens in Acme, whenever a ticket is created in Acme, if it's critical enough and there isn't an assignee, let's, you know, shoot that on up the pipe and make sure Richard Hendricks gets assigned to it. So what I did there, I prompted AI, hey, I want to have this workflow. It thought through it. The LLM behind the scenes took advantage of several tools that it has available to it to query for components that are available, including the Acme component. And it created a plan for the workflow. So it's going to change the default trigger to a Acme resource change trigger. Cool. Configure the trigger for ticket creation. Seems reasonable. Add a conditional branch that checks if the priority is high or critical and the ticket has no assignee. Okay, that seems like a pretty reasonable thing to do. And then finally, use the update ticket action to assign it to Richard Hendricks if the conditions are met. Perfect. That all seems reasonable. If there was something that seemed off about this plan, you can chat back and forth with the AI agent. I'm going to click approve for a moment and just let it start doing its work. It feels a little like, Claude in your IDE making a plan and then you watching it as it changes a few files at a time. You might notice my trigger just changed. It's not configured inputs yet. I'm interested to see if it ends up punching in some inputs for resource type or moments here in a moment. There we go. Ticket.created. Oh, it assumed I didn't give it enough context. It actually just needs just the word created here. But that is all right. We're going to talk about context and triggers in just a moment here. All right, let's see what it's doing with a branch step. It added a branch step. I'm hoping it adds a condition properly. I'm interested to see what happens with this compound condition. If it's priority high or critical and no assignee. I'm interested to see if it comes up with a compound conditional here in a moment for me. There we go. Let's take a look. If priority equals high or priority equals critical and assignee is empty. Okay. Cool. That sure seems like a reasonable set of things to do. It is going off the rails for a moment. It is adding an additional else branch. This is one of those edge cases that oh, there we go. There we go. I knew our developers had put in an edge case detector right there to grab those else branches recently. Let's see what happens here in a moment. All right, we've got our ticket set up. And we should see in a moment this assignee. I want to show off what this assignee is going to do in just a moment here because it's pretty cool. Oh, AI is going to prompt us about if it's not quite sure about something, it's inferring that it should snag the ID out of the trigger for the ticket ID, but it just wants to make sure, hey, is that double check everything looks right? Yep, that one looks just fine. Let's go ahead and add that. It's also checking the assignee for a moment. Now, I wrote Richard Hendricks. It's saying Richard Hendricks, the CEO of the company, and I've got other options beyond Richard Hendricks, CEO of the company. In fact, if I go ahead and click this step here, Richard Hendricks is one of the options, but there's also several other assignee options available in this input. This is something we're going to talk about in a moment when we look at custom connector code here. But each of these inputs is driven by a data source that's going to dynamically reach out to Acme and look for the people who are possible assignees. And it's going to present those, and then our LLM is going to look at that list, find the best match. In other words, Richard Hendricks should match Richard Hendricks, CEO. And that all looks good. Let's go ahead and save a draft of that. And in fact, let's save a new version and enable this version. Oh, ticket priority assign. I'm going to refresh for just a moment and see if we can get past this this branch thing. Oh, that's frustrating. My apologies. This is something I'll send a ticket to our engineering team that we got another couple of extra else branches sitting there. Oh well. LLMs behave randomly. Sometimes the 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 non-deterministic behavior of an LLM is frustrating sometimes. I'm going to come back to that. Anyways, so you've got a couple of options for the blank canvas problem. Workflow templates, you can provide your customers with templates, they can edit them. AI Copilot, you can describe, your customers can describe what they want the Copilot to build. It goes ahead and builds it for you. Last up, workflow context is something that we've recently developed, and I want to show off what a workflow context is here for a moment. So within your app, let's say your customers are on the ticket screen and there's a bunch of tickets available, and they want to build an integration or a workflow, but they know they want to build it related to tickets, right? You might want to create a workflow that is that has some pre-canned information set up, but it might be dynamically populated pre-canned information. So it's not just a template. For example, if I click automate up here, I might say I want a workflow, a new automation, and I'm really interested about when a ticket's created. That's the specific thing that I'm interested in. When a ticket is created, I want to go do something. So I can go ahead and click on, all these custom buttons that you can choose to build. And by clicking on that, what's going to happen is a workflow is automatically going to be created with our new workflow contexts. And some pre-canned information is going to pop in where because I was on the tickets screen and I clicked the when tickets are created button, It's going to populate ticket right here and the created moment, and it's going to in fact hard code those so that I can't edit those values. They're locked in, and my customers don't need to discover which properties they need. They clicked on when tickets are created. I want an automation, and it was created on for me. From here, they can go ahead and prompt an LLM to go ahead and build out the rest of the workflow. They can build it out themselves. But I want to show off like what that workflow context is with uh, what I'm calling my simple button example. So don't judge me too hard. I have a single button, and when I click this button, stuff happens. When I click Let's Automate on this page, it thinks for a moment, builds a new workflow, and we've got a trigger. Let's look at what that let's look at what was behind that button for a moment here. So on the left-hand side, I've got a button, short and sweet. Here's a button. It says let's automate. When I click it, it runs a function. Now, what does this function do? When it runs, we're going to run Prismatic create workflow. Cool. We're going to give it a context name, and I'll show you the context in Prismatic in just a moment. And it's going to create a workflow that's called My Awesome Workflow, and it's going to provide what's called context data. So I'm put ticket, and for the sake of just being contrived and showing off that I can put whatever thing here, got created, dude. If I click on my trigger, my ticket got created, dude. That's the event that I want to, trigger off of. These are kind of handy because let's say you've got an app that's similar to something like Jira, where maybe all of your tickets exist within projects, and you want to create a workflow to notify you when tickets are created, but just for the project you're currently viewing. You can create one of these workflow contexts so that when they click that button in your app, it creates a trigger that already is pre-populated with the ID of the resource. Maybe it's the ID of the project that you're currently viewing. And in that way, you've got this like pre-canned like pre-configured workflow that is all set up to trigger exactly when tickets are created on the project that you're currently viewing and not other projects. And you don't need to hard code these things. These things that you pass into your context can be dynamic values. So what does that look like in Prismatic in the workflow contexts? If we go into ticket automations here, this is my workflow context that I created. I named it ticket automations. So that's what you're going to see right here. I defined within my workflow context that I want a specific trigger to be used when the new workflow is created. I want this Acme resource changed trigger to be used. Perfect. I want the data that comes in. I went ahead and filled it with a couple of text fields, but you can add text fields and number fields and Booleans and whatever else that you want. And I went ahead and said, this key that comes in, I want to inject that into resource type here, into that input. And whatever came into moment key, I want to inject that in the moments right here. So what workflow context do again is just puts your user into a workflow with a trigger that's already pre-populated, pre-set up so that they don't need to go hunting for the right trigger, and they don't need to go configuring a bunch of inputs, and they don't need to like try to figure out like, well, what is the ID of the project that I was just in? that can just be pre-populated for them. And that married with the AI Copilot gives a lot of good kind of straightforward context to how to for your user for how to go about building these things. A few notes here that I'd recommend for you so far as building the custom triggers that are going to back your workflows. First thing I recommend is have triggers and have those triggers automatically create webhooks for you when they're deployed. You can check out our docs, but like whenever a workflow is deployed, automatically create webhooks in your app that listen to certain events. I'd also recommend so far as inputs go, if you remember for a moment, looking back at one of the workflows that I had over here, not that one, this one. Richard Hendricks was a something that was automatically populated from a dropdown. And similarly, in our if we're going to go ahead and like create a Slack workflow, for example, um, this drop-down menu is not a static drop-down menu that has, static values. It's a dynamic drop-down menu that has exactly all of my Slack channels. I'd recommend within your custom component that for any of your inputs, that all of your inputs are data source driven. So with the update ticket action, let's say, the update ticket action takes an assignee. The assignee is powered by a data source in the embedded workflow builder, ticket assignee. And I just have some kind of like bunk data for that one. I've got just some fake assignees, but your data source can go pull data dynamically from your app and pre-populate those values, which are going to save your users a lot of trouble if they can just select some records from a drop-down menu as they're configuring your triggers and configuring your actions. You might have noticed as it built through one of these workflows that it knew to populate the ticket ID um, in this input. It knew that the triggers results body data resource dot ID was a property that exists at all. The LLM knew that because if we look over at our trigger, the trigger has an example payload that contains an example of what this trigger might yield, including the body data resource ID right here. Um, so strongly recommend you have example payloads within your triggers and within your actions. By having those example payloads, the LLM doesn't need to just guess what sort of data is going to come out of an action in order to map inputs for the next action. It knows exactly the shape of the data that's going to come out, and it can map those fields properly. Couple of other things that I strongly recommend as you're building some custom connectors. When the LLM is prompted for like, hey, after building the or after, a ticket comes in, update the ticket so that it's assigned over to Richard Hendricks. There's 10,000 different actions that it could possibly run within Prismatic. How does it know which action is the right one? Well, the LLM ends up having some tools that can query for actions, names, and descriptions. So I strongly recommend as you're building your actions and you're building your triggers, um, keep your descriptions really descriptive, noun, verb, adjectives, what exactly this thing does. This fires when a resource, lead, an invoice, a ticket, a to-do is created or updated in Acme. Or your action might say something like, create a new ticket. This probably isn't this is an example of a bad description right here. Create a new ticket. You should probably have like, create a new ticket within Acme OS or something like that. But yeah, keeping your action names and descriptions descriptive, especially that description, is really going to help the AI Copilot when it's determining what sort of action um, or what sort of trigger to end up using within your workflow. Last thing I want to show off here is that you might notice that all of my actions and all of my triggers have a connection input, but within the workflow builder, my users are not being prompted for an Acme API key. It would be pretty silly. It would really feel silly if my users logged into Acme OS and then they go into the workflow builder and the workflow builder is like, hey, what's your Acme API key? That just feels like a pretty asinine thing to ask. So what I'd recommend you do there is create what's called a reusable like org activated customer connection or org managed customer connection. So as soon as you've built your component, looking into custom components here, I have an Acme component. Create a connection. I've got my Acme connection. And go ahead and pre-fill any of the values that make sense to pre-fill, but keep the other ones per customer. And specifically, select that you want to use this connection within the embedded workflow builder. By selecting this and toggling this on, this will make it so that you as the organization, I as Acme, it's my responsibility to make sure that my customers like Hooli have an API key that is specific to them. So they've got, an Acme API or an API key that I've set. And by doing that, by setting an API key for my customer on behalf of my customer, they end up not being prompted for an API key here. They end up just just not seeing it at all. It just becomes a transparent thing. And if you want this sort of like seamless workflow builder experience to be in your app, you want it to be a real seamless thing. So kind of recapping things here, product integrations cover top of funnel, but automations, especially, I should reinforce this idea that automations are both like connections to third-party apps and to the automations that you just want to have internally within your app, really solve the long tail of this like integration problem. Customers with the EWB stay in your product and your team stays in control of things. So you might see that if I go ahead and let's say as a customer, I go ahead and enable one of these integrations. I as an that's a bad trigger example. That's a bad example. But I can go ahead and watch what workflows my customers have built and kind of keep track of those things. Helps with your roadmap and every customer's workflow. It's going to be a little bit different. Um, the answer is definitely not that your organization should build every single workflow that your customers ever want. You're not going to have the time to do that. And it turns out with EWB, you can just kind of hand a low code builder to a moderately technical person at one of your customer sites, and they can go ahead and go nuts and build a bunch of workflows themselves. Couple of resources for you. We'll drop these links in the Zoom chat here in just a moment if they're not already. I do want to ask, like, what are you interested in next? We're going to be talking about integration visibility in June, but after that, I'm really pumped. If you've not seen the Slack messages, we are doing a bunch of work on large data sinks. I know it's been a thorn in a lot of people's sides that workflows can run for 15 minutes, but sometimes you have 10 hours of data to chug through or whatever. We've got some cool things coming down the pipe for handling large data sinks. Observability and log search are another big thing that that we're doing a lot of improvements on. You probably should have seen this already. Some of our logging's a whole lot faster now that we've switched the back end on what's back ending our logging. Um, we've got a couple other options here: AI overview, MCP server for production AI agents. Or if you have any other thoughts, go ahead and throw that in the chat. Let's go ahead and switch over to Q&A. Angela, appreciate the commiseration for the live demo stuff, especially with AI. Man, I've got a gripe on that for a moment. That demo worked 8 times in a row in pre-recording of this, and then it added an extra else branch. It happens. It happens. Uh, What's the difference between a workflow and an integration? Great question. We're using the term workflow for what your customers build in the embedded workflow builder. Integration, we're calling just the thing that your organization built that your customers end up deploying. There's a couple of differences between workflows and integrations. Integrations have a config wizard ahead of it, so like you design a config wizard experience for your customer where they go and punch in a bunch of details and config variables. In the workflow builder, all of that configuration is done like on a step-by-step basis. So like in an integration, they might select what Slack channel to choose in a drop-down menu, and then you feed that config variable into your workflow, into your flow. In the workflow builder, though, they're going to select their Slack channel from a drop-down menu, like uh, as they're building their workflow. What happens if a customer asks the workflow to do something that you do not have a custom component for? Great question, Christy. There's a few things that could possibly happen. Often it'll reach for we have a generic HTTP connector that does a pretty darn good job at connecting to third-party apps that do not have built-in connectors. So if the LLM can go do some research and identify like, hey, this app that you've asked me to go hit doesn't have a built-in connector, but it does have an open API spec that shows what endpoints are available. It'll likely reach for the built-in HTTP connector and do a post or a GET request on over. Is there a way to protect or lock down your integration and only allow some limited workflow changes by customers? Angela, that is a great question. There are some things that you can do. Let me share my screen for a moment here. So your customers do have some amount of free reign on what like adding branch steps and going through there. There's not a way to like lock and say like these 5 steps need to be here, but these other ones don't. But in my workflow context, one thing that I didn't show was how to limit actions. I showed that you can add a workflow uh, and specify like a specific trigger, a set of triggers that are available. In addition to that, if you want to lock down your workflow and say like, I want to by default disable all components, and I want to explicitly say that my customers, when they open up one of these automations, they are allowed to do Slack things and they are allowed to do Microsoft Teams things. So they're allowed to do Slack things and Microsoft Teams things, except within Teams, let's say, um, I might say that, I want a few of the actions to be disabled. You can kind of pare down what you want like that, or if you want to say like I want all connectors to be enabled, except for the fact that we are a direct competitor of Adobe Acrobat Sign, maybe, and we sure don't want our customers to see one of our competitors in the list of components that are available. Maybe you'd want to do something like that. So you want to like disable certain components and prevent your customers from using those components. I'd recommend doing something like that within your workflow context, and that'll kind of pare down the components that are available. I know it is time, so thank you so much for jumping on today. Angela, I'll follow up. I'll copy and paste this and follow up with you right after this one. But thank you so much. You all have a wonderful afternoon.